Good morning, everyone. How are you? I'm so happy to have a chance to get into chat with you in the mornings. I think that means I'm somehow getting more organized. Welcome to a very, very special episode of Elevenses with Lisa. In last week's episode, it was number 14. We talked about how important it is to tell our stories, and we went through the process of creating videos about the stories in our family history. Now, every family has many stories, and those stories dovetail, of course, into history at large. And that is certainly true for Daniel Horowitz and his family. Daniel experienced the horrors of the Holocaust, and many of them tragically perished, and those who survived narrowly escaped to locations halfway around the world. But in just a few decades, Daniel and his family were once again forced to escape unforeseen, devastating societal upheaval. It's an inspiring story, and I've invited Daniel to the show today. I'm so grateful that he's here to share his very personal story and to talk about what we can learn from history. Well, we're living in very uncertain times, now more than ever in the year of 2020. But as always, history can shed a really important light on where we're headed, what we're going through, what's happened in the past, and maybe that can help show us, if we choose, how we can avoid repeating the challenges of the past. And of course, many, many families in our family trees throughout history have faced uncertain and dangerous times. And today we're going to talk to a genealogist that you know, I'm sure, very well about the story of his family and his own story, because really, aren't we all, of course, right now in history, and our story is just as important as those that we're researching. Daniel Horowitz is here, and he is the genealogy expert at MyHeritage. He's the company's liaison with genealogy societies, with the media. He lectures and attends conferences. And of course, we were just both talking off camera that that's not happening that much this year for either one of us. But he's still just meeting people where they are, and he's meeting them virtually. So he has been dedicated to genealogy since 1986. And he taught and edited the family history project called Searching for My Roots in Venezuela for 15 years. Daniel, my friend, welcome to the show.
Hello, Lisa. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to see you and to chat with you, even if it's through virtual and through the distance.
It's so true. Thank goodness we have this at this time.
Yeah.
I've been thinking so much about last time. I don't know if it was the last time we saw each other. I think at Roots Tech, probably in Salt Lake City. But a year ago this month, I think we were back in Birmingham, England, and we were at the genealogy show. Was that last year or the year before? Oh my gosh.
That was last year. Yes.
Last year. It seems like forever ago. But we sat down and had dinner, and I just was riveted by your story. I've heard parts and pieces of your family's history story, but hearing your own personal story. And I've been thinking about you so much during these uncertain times, because I just think you have an amazing story to share. So thank you so much for coming today and being willing to share.
My pleasure.
I wanted to start kind of maybe take us back a couple of generations, maybe back to your grandparents' generation. Tell us about where they were, the times they lived in.
Well, we're talking about first of the century, 1900s. They were all from Europe, 4 grandparents from the northern Romania, or today northern Romania, because we always need to remember that border changed, especially at that time before the war. And from my paternal side, this is my maternal side. My paternal side was from the southern Ukraine, southern west Ukraine, which some days was also Romania, depending on the day of the week, of course.
Yeah.
And my paternal grandparents met there before the war, and they saw what was coming, And they were lucky enough to escape the area before the war. Part of the family stayed behind during the war. Thanks God was an area that was not that much affected. At some point during the war, the Germans took it and they created concentration camps with the exact sense of the word, to concentrate them in one area. So they moved them around, but not so much killing people in that area. And both my grandparents were already married when they moved to America. And funny enough, America for them was actually Trinidad. And they established there with other people coming from the same area, the same city, Chernovitz, which is Chernivtsi today in Ukraine. While my mother's side actually were in Europe and were more naive and were probably thinking that nothing is going to change and the war is not going to catch them. Unfortunately, it did, as most of Europe. They were actually taken to extermination camps. My grandmother's family, almost everybody perished in Auschwitz. My grandmother and the sister managed to escape at the end of the war because they were actually caught there in 40, 42, 43, right? The ends of the war. So they managed to escape, go back home, realize that home was not what it was before they left, or they were displaced. And they just started to contact family and try to move to better countries, and also they met my two grandparents' maternal side, met there, like in the way. They married over there, and my grandfather had a brother already in America. Now, this time America was South America, was actually Venezuela. So they immigrate, or they actually tried to emigrate from Europe to Venezuela, but it was not easy. It was 49, 44, 48, 49 after the war. So they had to live on a refugee camp in Italy, actually in what is today the Hollywood of Italy, Cinecittà, which is the movie studios.
Right.
It was also there, the movies, but that time the movie studios, but it was arranged to be a displaced person camp, a refugee camp. So my mother actually was born there in the 2-year time that my grandparents were waiting to be able to immigrate to Venezuela. And they finally did in the 50s. And back to my father's side, my father was born in Trinidad with a sister. And my grandparents again saw, and you're talking about history repeating itself, the rise of the Black Power in Trinidad, because Trinidad at the time was a British colony ruled by white people. And we already know always what happened to the Black people when they are ruling by white people, unfortunately, in some cases, not all of the cases. So they raised, and there was riots and a lot of problems over there. So having seen what happened in Europe, they immediately went to the next port of call, and that was Venezuela. And that was where my parents grew up, where they lived most of the time, and where I was born.
How did Venezuela become the target location? What was it about that?
It was actually because like common people migrating to the different places. Venezuela was a very welcoming country, although they had quotas for different type of people. In fact, I have a paper saying that my grandparents were Catholic. And that was the only way that they could go into Venezuela, because they had a quote for Jewish people going into Venezuela at that time. So they faked out the documents and they arranged to immigrate. And mostly it was because everybody had some relative already there. Or, for example, from Trinidad, there was a lot of Jews from Chernovitz and from that area, and they all moved together. You know, family, it doesn't matter when, they all want to be together. And if you have friends and if you know somebody from your childhood, you want to always move together and be with the same type of people always. And again, Venezuela was a very nice democracy, and they opened their doors to most of displaced people or people in troubles, even with the quotes and everything. And it was a very nice place to start a new life with a lot of opportunities, and not only for Jews, also for Italians, or also for Portuguese, Spanish people, like people from all over was very welcome in the 50s and in the 60s in Venezuela. Well, at least that's what I understand. I was born in the 70s, so I can only build that from firsthand from the 70s on. Right. And yes, for a long time, it was a very welcoming place. It was home.
So before we talk about the fact that you were born there in Venezuela, I'm thinking about just your two sets of your parents and their families. And you were saying that I think it was your mom's side, that they were, in a way you described it, a little more naive. And did you hear stories as you were growing up? Did you hear them talk about what makes some people go, holy smokes, we need to move, we need to get going, this is dangerous, and others who it's like, just kind of sitting and hoping it's not that bad, and yet it just fell apart?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't hear a lot of stories from my father's side. So most of the things that I know thanks to my research on the genealogy and the documents, and more or less what I managed to ask the living relative. But my passion for genealogy actually comes from the stories of my grandmother, with this huge family, living in a town where half of the town was related one with each other in one way or the other, and living very good. And that is what I think gave them I don't want to call it the false sense of secure, but they were really living in a secure place. They all have their houses, they all have their jobs. They didn't feel threatened by any place or any person. The locals actually were very good until they had this external factor. And I think that it's more, people that just let others influence them, and they became, I don't know if to call it bad people, but for sure to my grandparents and to my family, they started to behave badly, pretty much from night to day.
I imagine there's a self-preservation that just kicks in, or there's, I think of in history, you see silence from people who kind of just don't want the attention coming their direction. There's others that it's like self-preservation. I need to jump on this bandwagon or I'm going to be in their shoes. I mean, I can't even fathom, and how scary it must have been to have people that you thought you knew and trusted just turn on you.
Yeah, and I think that is the same reason why you have so many few heroes, because not everybody is willing to risk their own life to like step against, or at least in those times,
Right.
when you hear terrible things that happened and you never knew if it was real or not. And I think that technology played a huge role in that, because the news didn't travel as fast as today. So
Right.
you couldn't trust whatever you were hearing. You don't know if it's real or if it's not real. And some of the news were so horrendous that people couldn't trust that things like that were happening at the moment.
Yes. I mean, good people don't think that way, do they? You don't think, your
Exactly.
brain can't even go to atrocities that others could put upon people. It's unbelievable. And you were talking about your, who was it? You said that, was it somebody was born during that transition time to
Yeah,
Venezuela?
my mom.
Your mom was.
My mom was born after the war in the refugee camp in Italy.
And that's where, too, you see pictures of people when they're older, but you forget they were young. Can you imagine being pregnant, and having the fears of giving birth, let alone in the middle
Yeah.
of all that turmoil. Amazing.
And not only that, but with all your belongings in a suitcase. And that's all what you have in the world, because they lost everything. And now they are trying to put up a family. They have new people in the family. There's a baby coming. I definitely have no idea how they made it. And we will talk about that later. But the year of my emigration from Venezuela was actually dictated by my wife being pregnant. And one of the things that we said is that we were not going to change places while she was pregnant. And here, talking with you, I realized that my grandparents didn't have that luxury. They were forced to move, and pregnancy just came in the way, and they had to deal with it.
Wow. So take us forward to 19. So you've got your parents, they've come to Venezuela in the 50s. By 71, little Daniel comes along. And tell us about life in Venezuela back then.
Oh, it was beautiful. Venezuela, and I still believe, is a beautiful country with beautiful people. And now that I'm hearing myself and I'm talking with you, pretty much like my grandparents' stories about Europe back then. But we had businesses. My mom had a store, my father had a store, my grandmother had a store. You could move freely through the country without almost any fears. You need to be careful, like in any other place and any other time. But I remember that as soon as I got my driver's license, I jumped into the car and I traveled the country, and I loved to go camping outside. And we have friends, and we were all friends of each other, the neighborhoods, the school, friends from work. It was really nice place to live. It was paradise for many, many years, and we were very happy over there
It
for
sounds like
many
you had some
years.
very entrepreneurial people in your family.
Well, listen, you do what you need to do, and my grandparents, when they arrived to Venezuela, they knew how to sew. So they put a small fabric, and later on, my grandfather started um, I don't know, jewelry store from my mother's side. From my father's side, they also had a jewelry store from Trinidad. My mother just opened a store because you need to do something. Like after you study, money needs to start coming into the family. My father became a photographer, and he opened a store to sell cameras and films and equipment and developing films. You remember those times when you went to the
Had to
store with the
wait.
film and had to wait like a week to get your pictures printed? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I myself, yes, like living in that environment, I remember all my life growing up behind the counter and selling clothes in my mother's store, or helping my father at the store, or just going to those markets in Christmas and buy things here to sell them there. And yeah, and in the meantime, I was also the teacher, which, funny enough, that's how I got money to pay for my studies. Being a teacher at the Jewish school where I just grew up and graduated. So yeah, like we learned to do whatever we needed to do, yeah, to survive and to progress and to get some incomes.
And of
And
course,
Venezuela was very good for that.
yes,
Like
and
everybody could have their business, and everybody could buy and sell and have commerce, and it was very good.
exactly. Now, in 1998, Hugo Chavez became president, correct? And so you have a lot of people who are successful. They own land, they own businesses, things are going along. But he comes in on kind of a platform of saying, let's somehow combine, socialism and capitalism, which has its
Yeah,
own problems. And of course, there's a lot of talk.
definitely.
Huh?
It's definitely not a good formula.
No,
Um,
exactly.
and being already a genealogist and being already a study of the history of what's happening, I would not say scared, but preoccupied for what I started to hear, and it's not also something that happened from day to night. Like it's something that started as a movement, and things that were actually legitimate. Like there were very poor people that was not attended by the government, and there was a very high class, mostly related to the government, that had lots of money and did a lot of things, and we, the middle class, were in the middle, and every day getting smaller and smaller, with people going down and south and instead of north, until yeah, he came to be president. He failed actually in a military intent to take the government, so he took the government in a democratic way, same as others oppressors in the world, or in the history. And I immediately noted this double speech, one for the upper class and a different one for the lower class. And I detected already which one was the truth. And very slowly you could see how the country started to go down and getting hostile to everybody. Not any race in particular, not any religion in particular. It was more a fight of the poor against the rich. And unfortunately, manipulated by the people in the government at the time. So things were good depending in which side of the fence you were standing. And
He was touting free education, free college, free healthcare, welfare programs that were huge.
yeah.
But of course, that started squeezing the middle class, who in a sense was the one paying the taxes, right? So eventually everybody becomes poor.
And not only that, but a lot of times he promised a lot of things without even being able to deliver. And he removed a lot of people, a lot of like knowledgeable people from key positions to be able to do the things that he wanted to do. And you saw the government and you saw the country deteriorating day after day after day. And at some point, again, I learned from my grandparents and from their history, and I said, this is not going to end well. And I start to prepare myself and my family to move to what I consider at the time that it was a better place. And so far, I'm happy with my decision.
I bet you are. Were you had extended family around you? Was everybody on the same page? Because when you read it through history, when things like this happen, some people, it's like they can't help it. Their eyes are open. They can see it. Other people never do. And that could even cause conflict within families. How did that work with your family as you saw things happen?
Interesting. Yes, it is very interesting that in the same family, not everybody was seeing the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And even those who decided that agree to move, they were not agreeing on the same destination. And probably that's another spot in history with families had to split. And that is why most of the people from Venezuela actually moved to the United States or were trying to look for moving to the United States, not necessarily Jews, Spanish people, Portuguese, like descendants of, because at this time we were all born Venezuelans, so we are all Venezuelans. A lot of people tried to stay in South America or Spain because of the language.
Right.
And that is also why you find a lot of Venezuelans in Miami. And it's very funny because today Miami is Spanish 100%. Like, people don't even address you in English.
Right.
They just go straight with Spanish. And I was, before Roots Tech, I spent a week there early this year, and I was amazed. I normally don't speak Spanish in public, and if I'm in the States, I speak English. They couldn't care less. It's like, you have it right here. You know Spanish. Whoops, straight with Spanish.
Yeah, there are probably a lot of genealogists who've seen you at conferences and don't even know that you speak Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Fluent Spanish, Hebrew, English, and I understand a few others, but let's keep that as a secret between you and me. Some people also had to do genealogy, and it's very interesting that a few people try to go back to the roots, to their original countries. In Europe, the European community was already established, so Italians, Spanish, Portuguese, they all try to go back to the motherland. I choose Israel because for me personally and my immediate family was the best destination. And also I think you need to get to a point like, yes, we all wanted to keep together in the family, but the family grew. Mm-hmm. And it is impossible to move a whole family together to the same place. The majority actually went to Miami, but a few of us just decided that Israel was better for us, and we moved here eventually. I actually asked my parents to move first because I was a little bit scared for their adjustment. I was young and I could adjust to everything, but, parents that they lived all their life and they were used to work, and we didn't have any problems with relatives because we had relatives here, or the language, we all speak Hebrew fluently, but it's changing your life completely from day to night. And I think that it's also a difference between our grandparents' generation to our generation. Over there, I think that the change were more subtle and they had a little bit of time to adjust or to start understanding what happened in that process. Like the migration process for my mother's family, it took 3 years since
Wow.
the war ended until they end in Venezuela. That's why my mother, when she came to Venezuela, she was 2 years old, and she was born in Italy. For us, it was more a decision of that's it. This is the time. We put it in the calendar and we move. The other difference, of course, is that we choose when to move and when was the most convenient time to move. And I was telling you before, we were almost ready with all the paperwork and all the things. And then suddenly we have something in the oven. And I said to my wife, listen, our life here really is not that bad. I always had a plan B, by the way, and a C.
Did you?
Yeah, I would say I would grab you with one hand, the kid in the other, and we just run in one direction, and I had everything planned. But things were not that bad. And even today, they didn't reach a point like during the war. So we could decide when, and we decided that we were not moving country, not pregnant or just with a newborn. And we wait a little bit. We actually wait about a year and a half. And my son had, funny things that I realized when I'm talking about. My son was 2 years old when we moved, same as my mother had 2 years old when she moved. So listen, history repeats itself even if we don't want it.
It does. And sharing it and talking about it, it's amazing how those realizations come to mind. You were in the middle of his presidency. How bad had it gotten? Had they taken businesses in your family? I know land was, taken away from people. What was it like at the end?
Not directly related to my family, but yes, friends or people I know lost their fabrics, lost their stores, lost land, just because. Like if you had 3 apartments and you were renting two and living in the third one, well, that was, and if one of those was vacant, they could assign or people can just invade your property and the government will not take them out of there. Um, yeah, like people suffered, not physically that much, but you could get robbed in the street without any problem. You could get killed, like in any place of the world. But it was a delinquency that the police was doing nothing against. Some cases I heard that sometimes they were actually involved in those procedures, illegal procedures. So you could see that really it was going to be very bad. And yeah, I didn't want to stay to be a witness how bad could it get. And we decided to move. But yeah, like the government was taking really actions to try to benefit some people over others.
Kind of manipulating society in so many ways.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any attacks on history? Was that an issue? Because in many different cultures and many different takeovers, when communist China was taken over, people's family histories were destroyed. Statues are torn down. Did any of that kind of thing? Was history a target during those times?
Most of the things were actually like to the place. Just because the place belongs to. And again, it was not only against Jews. There was at least a very famous club owned mostly by Spanish people. They just the police decided to just break in one day and take it from the owners and
Wow.
try to look for people over there. Or I don't even remember exactly what happened over there. But no, like the statues, most of the statues were Simon Bolivar, which was the independent of Venezuela and a few other countries in South America. And Chavez and his people were very in favor and trying to rebuild what Bolivar thought and said, with, of course, different ways. But no, like history was actually embraced because like they were blaming history for their current situation. So they didn't want people to forget the history. They used history as an excuse to do whatever they were doing. And yes, of course, new statues were raised and were put in public places, very similar to communist countries.
So while you were there, you were teaching about family history, you were becoming passionate about it yourself. Share with us a little bit just about how did that kind of get on your radar, and how important was it to you? And what do you think that uh, what would you tell a young person who is living today and saying, well, what does it matter? What does it matter?
Well, definitely it matters. First of all, let's make that
Yeah.
very clear. And I started even younger than then, as I said, with the stories of my grandmother that I asked to hear again and again and again. So for all the young people over there, yes, you need to ask questions and you need to hear it many times. You need to record it, and that's what I
Mhm.
started to do: record it on my genealogy. And then I was called by my ex teacher that became the principal of the school and say, listen, you were a good student, you're passionate about it, come and be the teacher. And I try, and I think I did a good job, but I will let my students to say if I did a good job or not, uh, to to try to transmit that passion, teaching them story, like regular history, uh, through their own family stories. And I send them always to ask their ancestors and the parents and the grandparents about their stories. And I think that that is what makes it so special for each of one, that you are embracing your own story. Because if somebody will come and will tell you a story, it may be nice, yes, but if you need to research and to take care of your own story and your ancestors, that will explain, at least to me and to all my students as well, why we were where we were and how we arrived there. And I see some of them really understood and also took it to new places and understood what happened in history and guide their futures. And that will be the other thing. Like you need not only to look back and to record the history to leave it for the future generations, you need also to look your own position and your own history and record your current acts and your current status and your current events, because those are going to be the future people history. And
Yes.
that is important. And technology gives us today all the the tools that we need to do that properly. Even this video, I am going to download it and to keep it on a backup as part of my genealogy and my story, the story of my life for my kids and hopefully their kids and their grandkids.
Exactly. And how much, your children who've moved and now they're in Israel and they need to know this history. I mean, you guys have traveled the world, as a family and tried to make your way in the face of such adversity. I'm interested to know, just before I let you go, because there's so much conversation these days about, I know here in the US, they started tearing down statues, but then they started tearing down statues that didn't even, have anything to do with what they were concerned with. And there's this idea about looking back at history and judging our ancestors. And I wrote about this a couple of years ago about sitting in judgment of our ancestors. And, it's in my view of things, my goodness, in 100 years, I don't want any of my descendants looking back at me and going, well, now what was she thinking? I mean, it'd be so easy to do. Nobody's perfect. I'd love to have your opinions and just have you talk a little bit about how we can all deal with and handle history and whether it's really fair to go back and judge people with today's standards from 200 years ago.
Well, let me tell you first that my kids, and probably as all the kids in the world, they have a father who is a genealogist and who is passionate for history and the past. And right now, I think they're suffering from it because it may be a little bit too much sometimes. But I do really hope that they will take at least a bit of what I am doing and what I'm preaching right now. And one of the things I am preaching, and I always bring this in family conversations, is that we cannot dare to judge our ancestors. And one of my tricks to involve kids in genealogy is just find the black sheep on your family, and you will have all the kids listening for weeks to those stories of those crook or the people that had to do illegal things. But, and you actually mentioned it at the beginning, people did what they did because they had to survive. And it doesn't matter how many proofs we have, it doesn't matter how many documents we read, it doesn't matter how many history we learn, we will never, ever be able to put ourselves in their shoes.
And we'll never know the complete story. We can't. Yeah.
No, definitely no. And we need to just be observant and learn what they did, how they did it, where and when they did it. Try to understand why. I agree, but never judge. And I see that recently also happening with the DNA test. Suddenly people finding out that the parents or the grandparents were not the biological ones, and how they there, and why never tell and the secrets. Well, it was difficult. I'm pretty sure that it was difficult, same as it is difficult today for us in other aspects. And I'm sure that, yes, it's upon us to try to leave as much explanation of what we are doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it. And unfortunately, I think that is the disease of humanity. Always, no matter what, people are going to judge, and people are going to distrust whatever somebody else say. And we genealogists, we have learned to look for the facts and to look for the sources and try to be as accurate as we can. But there is always a percentage of uncertain facts and things that we will never be able to have it 100% sure. So definitely don't judge your past, don't judge your present, and try to teach your kids not to judge your neighbors, your family, your relatives, your ancestors, anybody. Just accept people for what they are, and try to live together. And if you cannot live together, you know what? Okay, each one lives in his own side of the fence, but you don't need um, to fight
Right. You
with
can
the
agree
other
to
side.
disagree.
Yeah, let's agree to disagree, and that's it. And each one should live their life happily ever after. Hopefully, I wish to everybody.
I love that idea. It's funny. You were saying that you grew up and went to Hebrew school, and I've been studying the Torah and the book of Genesis. And even God said way back when he picked Noah to survive the flood with his family, he says very specifically, he judged him as a good man in his time. And I thought, how fascinating from a historical standpoint. If we only knew, we might look at him, if we knew Noah's whole story, we might think, oh my gosh, but back then he was a good man considering the evil around him. I mean, so it goes all the way back, how we can't, we're warned to not take that view of
Mm-hmm.
people. And I think of stories even recently that I've uncovered that I cannot believe have absolutely 180 turned my opinion about certain people in my family. Because guess what? I didn't have all the information. And even now I'm very aware. I still don't have all the information, but I sure understand a lot better. I like to think that family history can nurture empathy, not judgment,
Mm-hmm. I
because,
think, yeah, it contributes a little bit
yeah,
to be more open-minded.
yeah, absolutely. Well, anything else? Any other uh, comments or lessons about, what not repeating history, taking care of our history and sharing our history? You do such an amazing job as you travel the world in other years, but even travel the world virtually, helping people share their history, through My Heritage. Anything else you want to add?
Well, probably it's just a word of encouragement, because I have heard it so many times, that, yeah, you're a genealogist, or you have the money, or you have the knowledge, or your family left to you all the documents and all the history. No, really, everybody, anybody can do this. Okay, yes, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for one and not the other. It will really depends where your family is coming from and what happened in your family. You may be lucky, you may not be lucky, but no matter what, everyone can do genealogy. Everyone can research and find out the history of their ancestors. And more important, everybody is obligated to keep record of the present,
Yes.
because the future generations definitely are going to judge you if you are not taking that responsibility right now. And I really, I was thinking, like, we spend so much time figuring out where our parents and grandparents lived and studied and worked. And at some point, I stopped and I said, wait, but I also went to school, and I also worked, and I also did a lot of things. And my family tree is empty where it
Yeah.
says Daniel Horowitz. I start to need to add facts over there because it's my duty, and this is what I'm going to leave for future generations. So it's not impossible. It's difficult. Well, a lot of things in life are difficult, but it's fun. It's
Mm-hmm.
fun, and I like very much a word that I actually heard from you, Lisa, many years ago: serendipity.
Yeah.
And serendipity happened when you are researching your family, when you're realizing that history repeats itself for good or for bad, and you take always the good thing about that, and you record it for future generations. So enjoy, and open your eyes to those serendipity moments that happened. And yes, they happen in the life of everyone.
They do. They do. Daniel, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for sharing your story today. I always get so much out of talking with you. Thank you, my friend.
It's my pleasure. Believe me, I enjoyed also very much. Thank you.
What a powerful story and inspiring. I hope that you found it inspiring as well. And notice that as Daniel told his story out loud, he was actually discovering new insight into some of the parallels in his own family tree. You know, storytelling doesn't just benefit the listener, but we as the storyteller continue to learn as well, don't we? I hope you enjoyed that. I hope if you liked this presentation, if you got something out of it, if you appreciated some conversation on these topics, that you give it a thumbs up under the video. And would you tell a friend about it? If you think that they would benefit, tell a friend and share this video with them. I would appreciate it. I think that there's more positive conversation that can happen. Now, before I let you go, I just want to share this note that I got from Lucinda, who recently watched the show, and she wrote in to share how episode 14 on making family videos got her wheels turning. And she also wrote about some success that she had recently using some strategies out of my book, The Genealogist's Google Toolbox. So let me tell you what she's been up to. It says, Lisa, and I think Lucinda is here, isn't she? I saw her in the chat. Lisa, this was a tantalizing episode. So she's talking about the video episode last week. My sister Betsy in Dallas and I talked a bit about stories we would share. I have an idea that I want to write up. Not sure about the video project yet. Need to give it some time, I guess. I've read your Google book and have used many of the tips to find new information out about family members. 1/3, 3 times great-grandfather, an obscure common man, she says, was one of the many who migrated to the fabled and fertile Genesee country in western New York in the mid-1800s. By using his name in quotation marks, remember we talked about that in a recent episode, and his county in separate quotes, I found him, or more precisely, his land, mentioned in a contested will for a neighbor's family. Because the county, town, and name of the tract were mentioned, I think I'll be able to search for him in the courthouse. I also found more information about a different ancestor who was a New York State Senator from 1855 to 1856. I then was able to find a cache of old photos and other images of Albany, New York, and the state capitol building at that time. I've had a lot of fun. I love stuff like this. I love that you're putting into practice what you're learning in the book, what we're talking about here on the show. I just think that's very, very cool. Thank you so much for writing in and sharing, Lucinda. And that's it for this episode. My little cup I didn't show you is in honor. Can you see what it says? Do the Puyallup. Yes, we lived for many years in Puyallup, Washington, and this was the state fair. I loved it. Our family loved it. We went every year, and I'm drinking today from the Do the Puyallup cup in honor of many county and state fairs that we may not get an opportunity to attend this year. But they'll be in our hearts. I have been going through the old videos I got digitized recently, and I was really excited to find many from Puyallup, from the Washington State Fair from many years ago. My kids were little tots. Next week, we are going to make a video using Adobe Spark. So it's free. It's a mobile app. It's a website. And so that means everybody can do it. And I'm going to show you how to make a really simple, cobbled together video. And we know, of course, that not everyone knows everything. And everybody needs help. I know I do. So later this month, I wanted to let you know that I hope you're going to join me, and you're going to sit in with me on a consultation with an Irish genealogy expert. She's going to help me come up with some strategies and ways to bust through a brick wall that I have in my family tree. So do you have a brick wall? Because if you do, then you're going to want to tune in, because I think you're going to pick up some really usable ideas regardless of whether or not you have Irish ancestors or not. Isn't it something how we can hear other people's stories, we can see other people's research, and it doesn't have to be our story, but we always have something to learn. And I saw many of you in chat. In fact, I want to go over here to chat. We're talking about that you had relatives, family that went through similar situations as Daniel's family. Steve says it's really encouraged him. Wow. Dear Haven, so I know you're in Olympia and you go by Puyallup. Do that. If you know how to pronounce Puyallup, then you know that you really have been there, right? But there's so much to learn. And as I was saying in the chat earlier today, I didn't think I'd be doing Elevenses with Lisa in July of 2020. But it's a crazy world. And you know what? Regardless of that crazy world, I am really glad that we do this every week. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's meant a lot to me. If you liked it, if you got something out of it, if it challenged you, thumbs up, okay? And if you're watching this video on the Genealogy Gems